The mirror never showed what was really there. It showed what was coming. Nobody in the Hale family knew that when they carried it up the stairs of their new home on a rainy Thursday evening. Nobody knew that the previous owners had covered it with a black cloth and refused to look at it for 3 years before finally abandoning the house altogether. Nobody knew that the little girl who once lived there had pressed her hand against the glass one night and whispered something into it, and that the mirror had whispered something back. All they knew was that it was old and beautiful, and that it fit perfectly on the wall at the end of the upstairs hallway. They hung it up, stepped back, and admired it. And somewhere deep inside the dark glass, something admired them back. If you felt that chill just now, good. That means you are paying attention. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story from the Cursed Mirror Anthology. Like this video if you dare to keep watching. Share it with someone brave enough to stay until the end. And whatever you do tonight, try not to look at your reflection in the dark. The Hale family moved into the house on Grayfield Lane in late October. There were 4 of them. The father, Daniel, who worked long hours and came home smelling like rain and printer ink. The mother, Susan, who loved quiet mornings in old houses and believed that every place had a story worth knowing. Their son, Eli, who was 13 and spent most of his time with headphones around his neck and a book in his back pocket. And their daughter, Nora, who was 9 years old and who noticed things that other people missed. Nora noticed the mirror on their very first night. She had been walking to the bathroom when she stopped in front of it and stared. The glass was old and slightly cloudy at the edges, like fog pressed against the inside of a window. The frame was dark wood, carved with thin patterns that looked like vines or fingers depending on how long you stared at them. Nora stood there for almost a full minute and then went very still. She told her mother the next morning that her reflection had blinked after she did not at the same time. After, Susan laughed softly and told her it was just tired eyes playing games in bad lighting. Nora did not argue, but she did not walk past the mirror again that night without keeping her eyes on the floor. Eli thought the house was fine. He thought his sister had an overactive imagination and that old mirrors simply distorted things because the glass was uneven. He told himself this very clearly on the 3rd night, when he walked past the mirror at 11 o'clock and caught, just for a second, a shape standing behind his reflection. He stopped, turned around. The hallway was empty. He turned back to the mirror and saw only himself, pale, wide-eyed. Heartbeat suddenly loud in his ears. He told himself it was a shadow from the window. He went to bed and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. By the end of the first week, all 4 of them had felt it. That particular feeling of being watched from the end of the hallway. Daniel mentioned it at dinner one evening, laughing it off as new house nerves. Susan said she had started taking a different route to the bedroom just to avoid walking past the mirror late at night. None of them admitted how serious they were. None of them wanted to be the first one to say the thing that was building in all of their minds, that the mirror was not reflecting them correctly, that the reflections moved wrong, that sometimes, in the glass, their faces wore expressions that their real faces did not. It was Nora who finally said it out loud. She sat at the breakfast table on a Saturday morning eating cereal and said very calmly that the woman in the mirror was not their mother. Susan put down her coffee cup. Eli looked up from his book. Daniel lowered his newspaper. Nora continued eating her cereal and said the woman looked like their mother, wore the same clothes, stood in the same spot. But she smiled differently. She smiled too wide, Nora said. And she never stopped. Even when their real mother was not smiling at all, the woman in the glass kept smiling that wide, still, silent smile. That afternoon, Daniel stood alone in front of the mirror for 15 minutes. He watched his own reflection carefully, moving his arms, tilting his head, blinking. The reflection copied him perfectly. He almost felt foolish. He reached out and touched the glass, and the reflection reached back. And for just one terrible second, Daniel felt certain that the hand pressing against the other side of the glass was slightly warmer than cold glass had any right to be. That night, Eli set up his old camera on a shelf at the end of the hallway, pointed directly at the mirror. He told himself he was being logical. He told himself that recording it would prove there was nothing wrong, and then everyone could stop feeling that cold, crawling discomfort that had settled into the house like a second kind of weather. He started the recording at 10 o'clock and went to bed. He watched the footage the next morning with his bedroom door closed and the volume low. For the first 40 minutes, nothing happened. The mirror sat on the wall, dark and still, the hallway empty behind it. Then, at exactly 10:47, something changed. The reflection in the mirror shifted, not because anyone was standing in front of it. The hallway was empty. But inside the glass, in the world that lived on the other side of the mirror, a figure slowly walked into frame. It stood in the center of the reflection, facing outward. It had the shape of a person. It had dark hair and pale skin, and it wore clothes that looked old and wrong, like something from a photograph taken many decades ago. It stood completely still for 11 minutes, and then it raised one hand and pressed it flat against the inside of the glass, and it smiled. That same wide, frozen, terrible smile that Nora had described. Eli closed the laptop. His hands were shaking so hard he knocked it off the bed. He told his parents immediately. Daniel watched the footage twice, his face going paler each time. Susan watched it once and then went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time without saying anything. They agreed the mirror needed to come down. Daniel went upstairs with a towel to cover the glass first, the same way, they later realized, the previous owners must have done. He stood at the end of the hallway and looked at the mirror from a distance before approaching. His own reflection looked back at him. Normal, calm. He walked closer, reached up with the towel, and then stopped. There were 4 reflections in the mirror, his own, and 3 others standing behind him, one for each member of his family. Susan, Eli, and Nora, standing in a row behind his reflection, perfectly still, watching him. He spun around. The hallway was empty. He was completely alone. He turned back to the mirror with his heart slamming against his ribs, and the 4 reflections were still there. And now they were all wearing that smile. He threw the towel over the glass with a shout and ran downstairs and told his family they were leaving the house that night and that no one was to go upstairs for any reason. They packed quickly and badly. Clothes shoved into bags, important documents grabbed from the kitchen drawer, Nora's stuffed rabbit pulled from under the bed by Susan, who refused to let her daughter go up herself. They were ready to leave in 20 minutes. They were almost at the front door when Nora stopped walking. Her family turned to look at her. She was staring at the small decorative mirror that hung beside the front door. A tiny thing barely the size of a dinner plate that had been in the house when they arrived and that none of them had thought about until this moment. In its reflection, Nora could see the hallway behind them. She could see the covered mirror at the end of it, the towel still draped over the glass, and she could see, very clearly, that the towel was moving. Slowly. From the other side, they left the house on Grayfield Lane that night, and never went back. The mirror stayed on the wall. The house sold again 6 months later to a young couple who said they loved its character, its history, its beautiful old hallway with that striking antique mirror at the end. The couple sent a photo to their friends. The first night, taken in that hallway, full of smiles. In the background of the photo, just behind them in the mirror, 4 figures stood watching, and they were smiling too. They thought covering the mirror would stop it. They thought leaving would make them safe. But the figures in the glass never needed the mirror to follow you. They just needed you to look once.